On Christmas morning 1941, a man in a rumpled civilian suit stepped off a flying boat at Pearl Harbor. He carried no orders in his hand. No honor guard met him, no band played. The Navy did not want the world to know he had arrived. Behind him, in the shallow water of the harbor, the masts of 5 sunken battleships still leaned against the sky. The oil was still burning in patches on the surface. The smell of scorched steel had not left the base in 18 days. This man was 56 years old. His name was Chester Nimitz, and 10 days earlier, in Washington, 28 admirals had ranked above him on the flag officer list of the United States Navy. Not one of them would receive the call he had just answered. This is the story of the command that no American admiral wanted, and the quiet Texan who took it because there was no one left to refuse. To understand why he was standing on that pier, we have to go back 10 days. Back to a Sunday morning when the meaning arrived faster than anyone in Washington could measure it. Pearl Harbor, December 7th, just before 8 in the morning. The numbers come at us the way they came at the country. 353 Japanese aircraft. 2 waves, less than 2 hours from first bomb to last. The Oklahoma takes multiple torpedo hits, at least 5, perhaps as many as 9, and rolls over within 12 minutes. The Arizona's forward magazine detonates. More than 1,000 men die in the blast itself. The final death toll on that one ship will reach 1,177. 5 battleships on the bottom, 3 more crippled, 188 aircraft destroyed on the ground, 2,403 Americans killed. By 9 in the morning, the Pacific Fleet is no longer a fighting force. But something else is happening beneath the destruction. Something the Japanese pilots did not aim for. Something their planners had not thought worth a second wave. Those omissions would matter later. In 6 months, they would matter more than anyone yet understood. And out at sea, hundreds of miles from the burning water, every single aircraft carrier in the Pacific Fleet is still floating. The Enterprise, the Lexington, the Saratoga, not one is inside the harbor. The Japanese have sunk the old Navy. They have not touched the tools to build a new one. But in Washington, on that first morning, no one is thinking about carriers. They are thinking about blame. Admiral husband Kimmel is 59 years old, 4-star commander of the Pacific Fleet. On December 17, 10 days after the attack, he is stripped of his command. Not court-martialed, not tried, reverted to his permanent 2-star rank in a single day. He will spend the rest of his life fighting to clear his name. He will die in 1968, still fighting. He will lose. Kimmel was not incompetent. He was thorough, meticulous, hands-on to the point of exhaustion. His subordinates respected his intensity and were burned out by it. He did not delegate. He did not build systems that could survive without him. And when the disaster came, the entire chain of command had exactly one decision-maker, and that decision-maker was drowning. Washington needed someone new. Anyone new, and Washington could not find anyone who would take the job. The acting commander is Vice Admiral William Pye, 61 years old, solid, careful, too careful. His first major decision is Wake Island. Wake is a coral atoll 2,000 miles west of Pearl. A Marine garrison is holding it, just barely. A relief force has already sailed from Hawaii, carrying supplies, aircraft reinforcements. Pye looks at the intelligence, weighs the risk of losing more carriers to Japanese submarines, and recalls the relief force. Turns it around, sends it home. Wake Island falls to the Japanese on December 23. 1,600 Marines and sailors and civilian contractors go into captivity. Some will not come home for 4 years, some will not come home at all. Pye did not lose Wake Island. Pye chose not to save it. And every officer in the Navy watching this understands something at once. The Pacific Command has become a place where careers go to die. Frank Knox is 67 years old, former newspaperman, Secretary of the Navy. He flies to Pearl Harbor personally. He walks the ruined docks. He returns to Washington and tells Roosevelt the truth. New leadership. Now, the list on Knox's desk contains the flag officer roster of the United States Navy. 28 admirals rank senior to the man he will eventually recommend. Knox goes down the list. Each name is considered. None emerges as the answer. Too old, too cautious, too closely tied to the disaster, too politically exposed, wrong background, wrong temperament, wrong moment. These are men who have spent 40 years in uniform, They understand what the Pacific Command means in December 1941. Congressional investigations are being organized. The newspapers are calling for heads. The Japanese are advancing across the map. Whoever takes the job inherits a shattered fleet, an enraged public, a hostile Congress, and the near certainty that the next disaster will end their career the same way it ended Kimmel's. The Pacific Command has become what military historians would later call a poisoned chalice, a cup that guarantees glory or ruin with no path between. And the name that keeps rising to the top of Knox's list is a man Roosevelt has been watching for 2 years. Chester William Nimitz, Rear Admiral, 2 stars, Chief of the Bureau of Navigation, which is the Navy's polite name for its personnel department. He runs the assignment desk. He decides which officers go where. He has commanded submarines. He has commanded a destroyer division. He pioneered the underway refueling techniques the fleet is about to need very badly. He supervised the conversion of the submarine force from gasoline to diesel. He is in every sense a builder. He is not a warrior. That is the entire point. But there is something else. Something Roosevelt remembers. January 1941. Roosevelt calls Nimitz to the White House, offers him the Pacific Fleet, the command that Kimmel would eventually take. And Nimitz turns it down. He tells the president that he cannot in good conscience jump over the seniority of officers ahead of him on the list. Roosevelt lets him refuse, but he does not forget. Now, 11 months later, the officer who once refused command on principle is the only officer left on Knox's list who has no fingerprints on the disaster. No blame attaches to him, no political enemies, no connection to Pearl Harbor. On December 17th, 10 days after the attack, Rear Admiral Chester Nimitz is at his desk in Washington when he is summoned to Secretary Knox's office. Knox does not ease into it. The Pacific Fleet needs a commander. The President has chosen you. Effective immediately, Nimitz does not celebrate. There is no record of him accepting with pride. What he says, according to those present, is closer to acknowledgement than acceptance. He understands the timing. He understands the position. He understands that the same seniority he tried to protect 11 months earlier has now been used against him. Roosevelt is skipping him over the men Knox had crossed off his list because Roosevelt can, and because no one else will take the job, and because a man who once refused command on principle is a man who will not seek personal glory in it. Nimitz cannot refuse this time. He goes home to tell his wife Catherine. She is 49 years old. She has been a Navy wife for 30 years. She does not need him to explain what the job is. She needs him to tell her whether he will survive it. He leaves Washington on the night of December 18, 6 days by train and flying boat, coast to Hawaii. He arrives at Pearl Harbor at 7 in the morning on Christmas Day, 1941. He is wearing a civilian suit. There is no honor guard, no band, no public ceremony. The Navy does not want the world to know its new commander has arrived. Someone drives him around the harbor, and Chester Nimitz sees what he has been given. The oil is still on the water 18 days later. The superstructures of the sunken battleships jut from the harbor at angles that make no sense. The Arizona's tripod mast leans against nothing. The Oklahoma lies on her side like a dead animal. The smell of fuel and burnt metal hangs over the base and does not lift. He does not speak, not yet. He is standing at the edge of a graveyard, and the men who would not stand where he is standing were probably right to refuse. December 31, 1941, 6 days after Nimitz walked the ruined harbor in his civilian suit. The change of command ceremony would normally take place aboard a battleship, the Pacific Fleet's flagship, a tradition older than the Navy itself. On December 31, 1941, there are no battleships available. There are no flagships. There is nothing above the waterline in Pearl Harbor that a commander can stand on with dignity. So Chester Nimitz reads his orders from the deck of the submarine USS Grayling. The image is not accidental. He is a submariner. The surface fleet he inherits does not exist. The ceremony marks the fact rather than hiding it. A man who spent his career underwater is taking command of a navy that has been sent to the bottom. Around him, the base is still burning in places. Salvage crews are still pulling bodies out of the harbor. 2,400 names are still being confirmed. The men standing on the pier are exhausted, humiliated, and waiting to be replaced. Nimitz begins with the one decision no one expects him to make. He calls the staff together, every senior officer at Pearl Harbor. Intelligence officer Edwin Layton, 38 years old, who briefed Kimmel on the days before the attack. War Plans officer Charles McMorris, who was in the room when the disaster unfolded. Dozens of others. Every man in front of him assumes he is about to be fired. Nimitz tells them the opposite. He says that any officer who wants a transfer will receive one with his personal support. But he hopes most of them will stay. They know this theatre. They know the enemy. They know the intelligence. Firing them would satisfy the public. Keeping them might win the war. Almost every man in the room stays. This is not sentiment. This is calculation. Nimitz has done the math the newspapers have not done. The Pacific Fleet has not been destroyed. It has been damaged. What has been broken is not the ships or the code books or the fuel tanks. What has been broken is the confidence of the men who ran the fleet on December 6. And confidence, unlike battleships, can be repaired quickly if the commander refuses to punish everyone within reach. The men who expected disgrace get a commander who trusts them. It is the most important decision Nimitz will make in the entire war. And he makes it in the first week. While Nimitz is rebuilding morale at Pearl Harbor, another man in Washington is rebuilding the top of the Navy. Ernest King, 63 years old, cold, aggressive, feared. In late December 1941, King takes command of the United States Fleet. 3 months later, he will also become Chief of Naval Operations, holding both jobs at once, controlling everything above Nimitz. King and Nimitz are opposites. King wants motion, attack, punishment. He believes the Navy must strike back at Japan immediately, publicly, and repeatedly, or it will lose the confidence of the country. Nimitz believes the Pacific Fleet needs time. Time to reorganize. Time to train new pilots. Time to build the logistics train that a Pacific war will require. King pushes. Nimitz absorbs. In February 1942, King orders carrier raids against the Gilbert and Marshall Islands. The results are mixed. Propaganda value. Limited strategic effect. But King is watching for something else. He is watching to see whether the desk admiral he inherited will break under pressure or hold. Nimitz holds. The conflict between these two men will run for 4 years. It will never fully resolve. King will never fully approve of Nimitz. Nimitz will never fully please King. And out of that friction, the American Pacific War will be fought. Spring 1942. The Japanese continue to advance across the map. The Philippines are falling. Bataan will surrender in April. Singapore has already gone. Java, Sumatra, Rangoon. There is no line on the ocean where the Japanese have been stopped. And in a basement at Pearl Harbor, a man in a bathrobe is trying to change that. Joseph Rochefort, 41 years old in the last days of 1941, 42 by June, Lieutenant Commander, head of Station Hypo, the Navy's cryptanalysis unit at Pearl Harbor. He works underground because the equipment requires cool temperatures. He wears a bathrobe and slippers over his uniform because he stands on cold concrete floors for 18 hours at a stretch. He has been known to work for days without leaving the building. Rochefort is trying to break JN-25, the Japanese Navy's main operational code. It is not a single code. It is a shifting system of superimposed ciphers that the Japanese change on a schedule. Rochefort's team is not reading the code the way one reads a book. They are reading fragments, patterns, repeated call signs, numerical groupings that suggest ship types. By the spring of 1942, Rochefort's team can read enough of JN-25 to identify a pattern. A large Japanese naval force is being assembled. A target is being planned. The location is designated in Japanese messages by 2 letters. A&F Rochefort believes AF is Midway Atoll, a tiny American outpost 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii, 2 small islands, an airstrip, a garrison, the last American position between Pearl Harbor and Japan. Washington disagrees. The Navy's Central Intelligence Unit, OP-20G, does not accept Rochefort's identification. Some analysts in Washington believe AF refers to the west coast of the United States. Others think it is Alaska. The dispute is not academic. If Nimitz sends his 3 remaining carriers to Midway and the Japanese strike the west coast, he will be relieved. If he holds his carriers back for the west coast and the Japanese take Midway, Hawaii is next. Nimitz has to choose. Trust the man in the basement, or trust Washington. He chooses the man in the basement, but he also chooses to verify. The plan is elegant and quiet. Nimitz orders the garrison at Midway to broadcast an uncoded message reporting that the atoll's freshwater distillation system has broken down. The message is sent in clear English. It is a lie. 2 days later, Rochefort's team intercepts a Japanese naval transmission. Encrypted, routine. It reports that AF is short on fresh water. AF is Midway. Nimitz now knows what Yamamoto is planning. But knowing is not enough. He needs carriers. He needs pilots. He needs a battle-ready flight deck for a fight that will begin in less than a month. And one of his 3 carriers is limping into Pearl Harbor with holes in her hull. The Battle of the Coral Sea was fought from May 4th to May 8th, 1942. It stopped the Japanese advance toward Port Moresby. It cost the Americans the carrier Lexington, sunk, and it left the carrier Yorktown badly damaged. Bombs through her flight deck, structural damage below. The initial estimate from the shipyard is 90 days to repair. Nimitz has 3 weeks. He walks into the shipyard. He looks at Yorktown. He tells the yard supervisor that the ship will sail in less than 72 hours. 1,400 workers descend on the carrier. Welders, electricians, riggers. They work around the clock in 3 shifts. They patch the flight deck with steel plates. They weld over the damaged compartments rather than repair them properly. They ignore standards that would have applied in peacetime. They do work that will need to be redone later if the ship survives long enough to need it. Yorktown steams out of Pearl Harbor on May 30th, 1942. She is not fully repaired. She is combat capable. The shipyard that saved Yorktown was still standing because the Japanese pilots on December 7th had ignored it. They had aimed for battleships. They had left the repair yards untouched. 6 months later, those yards would put the 3rd American carrier back in the water in time to ambush the Japanese fleet at Midway. The mistake of December 7 was still paying interest in May. One problem remains. Nimitz has 3 carriers. He needs 3 carrier commanders. And his best carrier commander is in a hospital bed. William Halsey, 59 years old, Vice Admiral, aggressive, charismatic. The exact commander every Navy man in the Pacific expects to lead the carriers at Midway. In late May 1942, Halsey checks into the Naval Hospital at Pearl Harbor. He has developed a severe case of dermatitis, a stress-related skin condition that has left him unable to sleep, unable to function, unable to command. Nimitz visits him in the hospital. He asks the question that will decide the battle. Who do you recommend to take your place? Halsey names Raymond Spruance. Spruance is 55 years old, Rear Admiral. He commands Halsey's cruiser screen. He has never commanded a carrier task force. He has never flown a naval aircraft. He is a surface officer, calm to the point of coldness, methodical, quiet, an analyst rather than a warrior. Nimitz accepts the recommendation. The decision is criticized inside the fleet before the battle even begins. Placing a non-aviator in charge of the carriers at the most important battle in Pacific history is a decision that would end most admirals' careers if it fails. Nimitz makes it in an afternoon. He trusts Halsey's judgment. He trusts his own judgment. He trusts that Spruance will delegate to the air group commanders and let them fly. Every large decision Nimitz has made in the first 6 months has been one that could destroy him. Keeping Kimmel's staff, trusting Rochefort, ordering the freshwater trap, sending Yorktown to sea half repaired, handing 3 carriers to a man who has never commanded one. None of them work in isolation. All of them have to work together, and on June 3, 1942, the Japanese fleet is approaching Midway. Nimitz does not go to sea. He remains at his headquarters at Pearl Harbor, 1,300 miles from the battle. He has done everything he can do. He has placed the ships. He has chosen the commanders. He has read the intelligence. He has believed a man in a basement over the entire intelligence establishment of the United States government. Now he waits. There are letters from that week, letters to his wife Catherine. They do not discuss the battle. They discuss the weather in Hawaii, the flowers in the garden, small matters. He does not tell her that he has bet the Pacific War on the intelligence of one lieutenant commander and the judgment of a hospitalized admiral. He does not have to. She has been married to him for 30 years. On the morning of June 4, the radio room at Pearl Harbor begins to receive fragments. First reports, a Japanese scout plane sighting, American torpedo squadrons attacking, losses, then more losses, then silence. Nimitz sits with the pages in his hand. Somewhere northwest of him, in a stretch of open ocean, 3 American carriers and a garrison of Marines are fighting the largest naval battle since Jutland. And every decision that put them there was made by the quiet man in Hawaii who no one in Washington had wanted for the job. The Battle of Midway is decided in 5 minutes. The morning of June 4, 1942, 3 Japanese carriers are turning into the wind to launch aircraft. Their flight decks are crowded with planes being rearmed. Bombs and torpedoes are on the deck instead of in the magazines. Fuel lines are open. American SBD Dauntless dive bombers arrive above them out of a broken cloud layer. From the Enterprise. From the Yorktown, they roll into their dives at 19,000 feet. Akagi burns, Kaga burns, Soryu burns, all 3 within a window of 6 minutes. Later that afternoon, the 4th Japanese carrier, Hiryu, is found and destroyed. 4 fleet carriers, 248 aircraft, more than 3,000 Japanese sailors and airmen dead in a single day. The strategic initiative in the Pacific passes to the United States and does not return. But Midway is not a clean victory. The dive bombers were only in position because someone else had drawn the fighters away. Torpedo Squadron 8, 15 TBD Devastator torpedo bombers from the carrier Hornet. 30 airmen, pilots and radio gunners. They flew slow, they flew low, they flew straight at the Japanese fleet without fighter escort. Their squadron commander had chosen a different course. Torpedo 8 had broken away to find the enemy alone. The Japanese combat air patrol saw them coming. Zeros descended on them. The devastators pressed on. They released their torpedoes. Not one of the torpedoes hit anything. All 15 aircraft were shot down. 29 of the 30 men were killed. 1 survived. Ensign George Gay, floating in the ocean, watched the rest of the battle from the water. Torpedo 8 did not sink a Japanese ship. Torpedo 8 pulled the Japanese fighters down to sea level. And when the American dive bombers arrived 20 minutes later at 19,000 feet, there were no Zeros in position to intercept them. The victory at Midway was built on the bodies of the men who did not win it. 3 days later, on June 7, Yorktown was hit by torpedoes from a Japanese submarine and sank. The carrier that 1,400 workers had patched together in 72 hours was on the bottom of the Pacific. She had lived long enough to help win the battle. She had not lived long enough to celebrate it. Nimitz's report on the battle names. It credits Rochefort. It credits Spruance. It credits the pilots. It does not credit Nimitz himself in any prominent way. He does not say that he won Midway. He says that his men executed the plan better than the enemy did. 6 months later, the man who had won Midway from a basement was punished for it. The intelligence unit in Washington that had been wrong about AF, that had insisted the target was Alaska or the West Coast, was OP-20G. After Midway, senior officers at OP-20G moved to reduce Rochefort's authority, to take credit for his work, to make sure that Rochefort's version of what had happened did not become the official version. They succeeded. In October 1942, Joseph Rochefort was transferred out of Station Hypo, reassigned to command a floating dry dock in San Francisco. A punishment posting for the man who had identified the target that saved the Pacific. Nimitz submitted him for the Distinguished Service Medal. King, in Washington, disapproved the recommendation. Rochefort spent the rest of the war in obscure billets. He retired in 1953. He died in 1976 at the age of 76, with no formal recognition of what he had done at Pearl Harbor. In 1985, President Ronald Reagan approved the posthumous award of the Distinguished Service Medal to Joseph Rochefort. It was presented to his family in 1986, 10 years after his death. The Navy that Rochefort had saved took 44 years to acknowledge it. There is another man whose story ended without justice. Husband Kimmel lived until 1968. He spent the last 27 years of his life fighting to clear his name. He submitted himself to investigation after investigation. He wrote a book. He gave interviews. He believed, correctly, that Washington had withheld intelligence from him before the attack. He believed, less certainly, that this withholding had made him the scapegoat for decisions made above his head. He never got his 4 stars back. In 1999, Congress passed a resolution urging that Kimmel and his Army counterpart, General Walter Short, be posthumously restored to their highest wartime ranks. No president has completed the restoration. As of today, Kimmel's official rank in Navy records remains Rear Admiral. The men who refused the Pacific Command are not remembered. The man who accepted it quietly in a civilian suit on Christmas morning is buried under 5 stars in California. And the man who was fired to make room for him is still, more than 80 years later, listed in the Navy's records at 2. The verdict of Midway did not fall on everyone equally. Late in his life, Chester Nimitz gave an interview. A reporter asked him about Pearl Harbor, about the disaster, about the question that historians had been asking for 2 decades. Nimitz answered slowly. He said that Pearl Harbor, in the way it happened, had been a mercy to the United States Navy. He said that if Kimmel had known the Japanese were coming, he would have taken the fleet out to meet them. The battleships would have sailed west into the ocean and engaged the Japanese carriers in open water. They would have been slower. They would have had no air cover. They would have been sunk in deep water, thousands of feet down, unrecoverable. And their crews, tens of thousands of men, would have drowned. In the shallow water of Pearl Harbor, the crews were rescued. 6 of the 8 sunken battleships were raised, repaired, and returned to service. The fuel farms, the repair yards, the submarine base, the carriers at sea. Every omission from the Japanese attack plan had become an American asset. Nimitz did not say that Kimmel had been lucky. He said that the American Navy had been lucky, in a way that only became visible from a distance. He did not claim credit for surviving what he had been handed. Chester Nimitz died on February 20, 1966, on Yerba Buena Island in San Francisco Bay. He had asked in advance to be buried without ceremony. He is interred at the Golden Gate National Cemetery in San Bruno, California. His grave is a plain white marker, identical to the graves around it. 3 of his old subordinates lie beside him: Raymond Spruance, who commanded the carriers at Midway; Richmond Kelly Turner, who ran the amphibious landings across the Pacific; Charles Lockwood, who ran the submarine campaign that strangled Japan. 4 men, 4 graves, no distinctions of rank in the ground. He had arranged it that way himself. 28 admirals were passed over for the Pacific Command in December 1941. History does not remember their names. It remembers the man who was left on the list when everyone else had been crossed off. Whether he was the best man for the job, or the only man still available, or a man who happened to fit a moment that no one could have designed, is a question with no clean answer. He took the job. He did the work. He did not ask for credit. And somewhere in the shallow water of Pearl Harbor, on a Christmas morning in 1941, in a civilian suit that did not fit the occasion, he stood at the edge of a graveyard and did not turn away.